Let's go. It's time for one of my cockamamie plans.
Welcome, friends. The moment we've all been awaiting is finally upon us. That's right, Star Trek Prodigy's second season. All 20 episodes have been plopped right in our laps over on Netflix. Now they've all come out as one, so that leads us to the question of how are we going to watch it, how are we going to discuss it, and it's going to be entirely different for everyone. You can binge it, you can watch it episode by episode, you can start with 17, skip to 3, and then stop. However you're going to do it, that's up to you, but they've also given us a little bit of good information today as far as the episode titles for the season, which isn't necessarily a strange thing to do. However, Netflix does not have the titles currently. They're still listed as like episode 1, episode 2, but by looking at the episodes dropped by Star Trek itself, we can see some semblance of the upcoming season as far as how it's going to be structured, and a lot of the episodes are two-parters. A couple of them are seemingly maybe like 4-episode mini-arcs or something. Specifically, I'm thinking that mid-season carryover there, so that at least helps us kind of structure how we want to talk about this. For me personally, I don't know necessarily exactly how I'm going to do it, but I'm currently planning to do mini episode discussions like I'm doing here for anything that's part of itself. So 2-parters, doing them as one. 4-parters, I'll do them as one. If they're a single one-off episode with no real connective tissue, I'll probably do that separately as well. So let's kick into episode 1 and 2, aka Into the Breach parts 1 and 2. This episode sets up a lot of the new status quo. It's a lot of table setting, a lot of reintroductions to where these characters are in their lives, and a lot of introductions to new characters. I would go so far as to say maybe, and this is hard for me since I have seen the first season, this might actually be a pretty decent onboarding point for somebody who hasn't seen season 1, but that's not really an issue here since both seasons are on Netflix, at least here in the States, and presumably wherever else the show is, both seasons are together, so why not start at season 1? A couple of the things that were slightly disappointing are just where the characters are in their lives, and I guess I said a couple. The only one that really irks me slightly is Dal. He had a lot of character growth in the first season, so I hate to see him kind of revert a little bit to his old ways here, but it does make sense. He's the only one not really fitting into Starfleet life so far, and that does track with his character. I am very cautiously optimistic that he's going to not be the annoying, whiny, always trying to get his way person the rest of the season. He's just developing at a slightly different rate, but it was nice to see most of the rest of the characters really falling in line with their Starfleet roles, especially Rok-Tahk, who gets assigned to Cetacean Ops. You have Jankum trying to be a more polite Federation-type person, even though he is a Tellarite. You've got Zero that kind of seems like might be going through a mini arc as far as, not being a corporeal being. All of these things are interesting. Murph is doing his security thing. It was good to see them getting postings, or at least giving mission parameters that are in line with what they want to do in Starfleet. Now, Gwyn, of course, is not part of this. She is being a special envoy or whatever off to Solum, the pre-First Contact version, because of all of this timey-wimey stuff going on, which, by the way, they actually did say in the episode, and we'll touch on that in a little bit, because this episode, or I should say these 2 episodes, were kind of structured a little bit differently insofar as who they were following. The first episode was more so starting off at the Academy, finding our characters, having them come aboard the Voyager A and get told what their mission is going to be. Nice to see all these characters back, and you also get the introduction of an A squad of warrant officers or cadets or whatever they're going to be. They share the same kind of cool new Academy uniforms. They're Nova Squadron, or Nova Squad, or however we're going to refer to them. So they're the best of the best, and as you can see in my background image here, one of them is this Vulcan. So that's pretty much the crux of the first episode. The second episode, while this still carries over, you have all of Gwyn's plot. All of that is self-contained to the second part for the most part, aside from a little call to Dal. And she goes off to Solum. As I said, this is pre-First Contact, 52 years in the past, before her society knows they're not alone in the galaxy, and she's trying to prepare them for a peaceful kind of emergence into the galaxy so that things don't go to hell like they did the first time. She has a bad experience there because somehow a Sensi has come back in time and warned them ahead of time. They think she's an imposter, and she runs into an earlier version of her father. All right, so that's really where everything is set up for now, but we learn that the real plan going on here is Janeway, behind the back of Starfleet, behind the back of Jellicoe, who has ordered this mission to be ceased with her command crew, is planning a rescue mission 52 years into the future, into this temporal wormhole in order to save Chakotay's life. And we actually do get a little bit more footage of Chakotay in this, a little bit more voice acting from Robert Beltran, a little bit more backstory, forestory, however you want to call it, as far as what he's been up to and why these stakes are so dire. We also get some weird entity popping out of this time rift to tell Janeway, or to warn Janeway, not to go into the future. Things end up going awry. Our lower deckers, I guess I'll call them, even though they're the Prodigy crew from the first season, they steal this prototype ship with a cloaking device and temporal shielding and all that stuff, which is also interesting to find out that Janeway is kind of circumventing the traditional rules of the Federation to have a cloaking device, kind of similar to what her future self did in Endgame before she came back to rescue everyone. So it kind of seems like she's following a similar path to future Janeway in that series of events, so that's something we can come back to later. They steal the ship and they accidentally get sucked into the time portal. Now, here's the intriguing part. It's only these characters seen on screen. Zero, Dahl, Jankum, and this new Vulcan character who is part of Nova Squad. The rest of Nova Squad, as well as Murph and Roktok, they get knocked out of this ship. They stay on board the Voyager A. So our team is now split up across time into a minimum of 3 different timelines going on right now. So this is the intriguing part. They were 40-something hours away from that time mark where the protostar came back in time originally. And I know this is a bit confusing. So that means we have the Voyager A time frame, we have the 52 years in the future Chakotay timeline, and we have these 4 characters in the experimental ship being trapped in a different timeline in the future before Chakotay and the protostar were sent back in time. So we're dealing with 3 different distinct time periods right now, and based on a lot of the episode titles going forward in this season, it appears we're going to be dealing with a lot of time shenanigans, possibly alternate universes, alternate timelines, especially the mirror universe at some point. There's just going to be a lot of time shenanigans going on, and I'm wondering how this is going to track, especially since this is ostensibly a children's show. It's very interesting to me that they're going so headfirst, so heavily into all of these, disparate timelines, different storylines running concurrently in different time frames, how they're going to interact with each other, creating branch timelines, communicating through time, changing time. That's a very bold choice for something that's, maybe not the most mature Star Trek show they've ever done, because it's supposed to be guided more towards kids. And I say that, I know it's on Netflix now, things could have changed, but they still have the Nickelodeon branding all over this thing, so it definitely probably still is made for 12-year-olds. So I am fascinated to see how much explanation and just how deep and how mind-bending they go into all these time shenanigans. So while we didn't spend as much time with our characters in the Academy as I was kind of expecting, it was more just like a placeholder to start in order to get them on the Voyager A later. I definitely enjoyed the interactions we got to see there. It honestly felt very nice to see these properly acting Starfleet characters, other cadets, a couple of instructors. It just felt nice to exist in this Academy setting for such a brief period of time. I know we're getting the Starfleet Academy show, but that's going to be set so far in the future, it's not going to have that same feeling as this era of Starfleet, this era of Star Trek. And speaking of which, it was a nice touch for them to mention here that Janeway was given the captaincy of the Voyager A, because most of the rest of the captains out there are dealing with the Romulan evacuation that we know took place prior to the events of Picard, but post the events, or I guess technically prior to the events of the 2009 Kelvinverse also. But with all of the shenanigans and time changing we might see in this season, is it potentially leading to a kind of a universe where Romulus is not destroyed? I don't think that's necessarily the end goal here at all, but as much as I liked Star Trek 2009 for setting itself so far apart by still kind of including the Star Trek that came before, I'm not a fan of the destruction of Romulus, because it kind of ended all of these storylines before we got to spend as much time with the Romulans in their height as I would have liked to see. It remains to be seen what they're going to do. I have to imagine there's going to be a lot of fun, different versions of characters, alternate universe versions of characters, all of that stuff. Nice to see the Doctor again. Nice to see Janeway again. Nice to see Chakotay again. There is probably going to be a heck of a lot more returning, recurring, or just surprise guest characters. How did you find these first couple of episodes of Prodigy? How are you planning to watch the show? And did you find this a suitable setup for the new storylines? I think that's all these first 2 episodes were. They were a setup, and now everything's really going to get kicked into this frenetic gear while we're dealing with all of these multiple storylines across these multiple timelines. Whatever you thought, leave it all down below. Like, share, subscribe, do all the fancy YouTube things. But until next time...
Strapping us in. Like it or not,
They're going into that wormhole.